The Mere House Derogation. Those who have travelled on the East Coast Railway from Newcastle to London will have passed the place. Few will have noticed it. The best view, because you have some slight warning of its approach, and the train will be travelling very fast, is to be had by sitting on the left-hand side of the carriage facing the direction of travel. Your warning is one of the larger city stations, followed by several miles of flat arable land, a large and neglected birchwood broken by patches of bracken and rank grass, and then a gently sloping pasture. At this point, the track bends ever so slightly to the left, and if you look ahead, close against the side of the carriage, you will see the dark outline of an unidentifiable square building, the base of which lies behind a low hill. A few seconds later, the railway gives full view of the structure, which is perhaps half a mile away to the east. It is, or was, a church. The square block first seen from the north was the top of its tower. It appears to be old, perhaps 14th century, perhaps a more than usually faithful Victorian reconstruction of something seemingly medieval. It is of a familiar pattern: grey crenellated tower, chancel with low-pitched roof, nave and side aisles. But it has a closed, dead aspect. As you turn back to the life-enhancing reality of your computer screen, you will say it is of no interest. Then an odd feature of what you saw may strike you. The building stood alone. There was nothing to justify its existence. No village, no houses, no road. Just a church and a graveyard in empty fields. You resolve to look again next time you pass, but you forget. Alban Bloomfield did not forget. Bloomfield was middle-aged, fastidiously exact in all his transactions, almost pathologically tidy, and tiresomely inclined to conversation by persistent questioning. He lived comfortably on an exclusive estate well north of the Humber, with a competent and aspiring female of the species, 2 well-attended cats, and a valuable collection of early English pottery. Of the 3, he most cherished the pottery. It stayed where he put it without argument. The others did not. His income, as a government adviser on hospital administration, generously served the interests of his collection, and the demands of the position did not exceed his capacity. They involved occasional visits to health establishments, where his pertinacity irritated people, and somewhat more frequent trips to London, where his precision calmed the accountants and upset the idealists. Overall, his life was as contented as his obsessive character would allow, and his uxorial relations, although distant by some standards, were generally peaceful. The one point of conflict was created by Bloomfield's abandonment of the personal judgments demanded by the faith of his fathers in favour of the certainties provided by the Bishop of Rome. The conversion settled for him questions he could not settle for himself, and, like little Jack Horner, he could not resist letting others know what a good boy he was. His wife was an unrepentant sceptic who endured, rather than praised, his smug apostasy. It was on one of his official journeys to London that he happened to put down the detective story he was reading, rationalised Gothic was his principal literary diversion, and glanced out of the window at the crucial moment. Surprised by what he saw, he looked again, but the image was whisked away. Later that month, he was heading south again and remembered to look. The building was closer to the railway than he thought. By the 4th journey, he had seen as much as the speed of the train would allow, and was left with irritating questions. To Bloomfield, given his character, the most irritating of which was that there was no reason why the church should be there. But there was a second building. About as far east of the church as the church was east of the railway, he had glimpsed a house. He had not seen it at first, because at the moment when one would get the best view of the church, the rectory, or whatever it was directly behind it on slightly higher ground. When Bloomfield looked at the only map of the area he could find at home, an AA book, he got no enlightenment. The area to the east of the railway was blank, save for a dotted track coming in from the north and ending without explanation. However, when he procured the Ordnance Survey, in the 1 and a bit inches to the mile version, it was more helpful. There was a sign for a current or former place of worship with a tower, and the word church in quasi-Gothic letters. The graveyard enclosure was shown, but no road or footpath. The other building was indicated by a black dot, and was evidently the terminus for the AA's apparently aimless track from the north. There was also some sort of minor road access from the south, but the two approaches did not join up. One of Bloomfield's more fertile sources of self-torment was his inability to leave well alone if it involved equivocal arguments or incompletely answered questions. And questions about the isolated church multiplied and repeated in his brain like unwanted musical catches. Was it an abandoned ruin that only the brevity of the view suggested was still intact? Was it still a place of worship for someone or for some activity? Why was there no path to it? Could it be the survivor of one of those villages made redundant by the Enclosure Acts, or emptied long ago by the plague? As luck, or perhaps ill luck, would have it, the means for answering his questions was at hand. One of the periodic reorganisations of the health service was about to take place, and his duties were largely on hold until his position was re-established at the enhanced salary he had been led to expect. A brief change of scene could be indulged, and, deserted buildings apart, he had always wanted to see for himself the Constable country and examine the locations for Lord Peter Wimsey's encounter with the bells, or P.D. James's highly personalised twists of murder, or even MacDonald Hastings's improbable but atmospheric romp with detection. It was time he consulted his wife. Yes, if he wanted to bury himself in what sounded like a fen embellished with dead villagers, he was welcome. The cleaning lady could feed the cats, and she herself had meetings over in Preston. Hadn't she told him? Her firm had developed an eco-friendly nappy, and there was a conference at which she had to make a presentation. Bloomfield fleetingly wondered what sort of presentation a nappy would make, and then whether his wife's commercial activities would create a conflict of interest with his national health recommendations. But he managed to suppress any comment. Thus released, he booked into an hotel at a place called Underwood, which the map indicated was only a few indirect miles from the deserted church and not too far off the road for Ely, his main destination. 2 days later, having double-checked the car and all his arrangements, and encouraged by the thought that on Saturday there would be little commercial traffic, he set out in fair weather and in a calm state of mind. His route avoided big cities, but he deliberately diverted from the motorway into a nearby market town where there were, he knew, a number of dealers specialising in old glass, earthenware, porcelain, and the like. He did not expect to find anything of interest, but it was always worth a look, and at the back of one shabby emporium he did briefly experience that peculiar flutter of excitement known only to the collector. In the half-light he saw a brown plate with the characteristic basketwork pattern on the rim of... No, it couldn't be. He took it to the front of the shop. It wasn't. It was a Victorian imitation, and not a very good one at that, of a 17th century original. He smiled ruefully at the price, a mere £5. An original Staffordshire slipware dish would be in the region of £50,000. But it would amuse and possibly expose the ignorance of some of his collector friends, and a fiver was nothing. The shopkeeper wrapped his purchase in newspaper and put it in a plastic bag. In half an hour he was on the motorway again. To his relief, the low sun that had been earlier in his eyes was now hidden by rumpled clouds. Some of the oncoming traffic had their headlights blazing, but his speed did not slacken until he was at the junction that delivered him to the B road that initially ran parallel with the motorway. After a few miles, it allowed him to turn east onto a partially tar-macadam track that claimed to be a sea road. It dipped under the mainline railway and continued in straight sections broken by sharp corners that appeared to avoid nothing and follow no boundary in the featureless landscape. The road was narrow, so narrow that he became acutely apprehensive about meeting any other vehicle, particularly anything like a farm tractor. On one side, the new ploughed furrow came to the road edge without a fence. On the other, a canal-like ditch lay dark with stagnant water. But he met no traffic, and saw none. and after a few lifeless miles that felt like a long way, the sea road rejoined a more confident highway, and he was shortly at Underwood, although what wood the village could ever have been under was not evident from the absence of high ground in every direction. The land continued into distance, black, vacant fields, apparently without boundaries, new-tilled earth broken by the occasional leafless poplar, and remote farmsteads where nothing moved. It would be impressive at sunrise, he decided. On a late autumn afternoon, at what would have been close to sunset but for the cover of darkling clouds, it was unrelentingly dreary. The village itself seemed devoid of people, a confused, confined little place, where activity was promised only by a few parked cars outside the scatter of brick cottages and stuccoed houses. Bloomfield could see no church or shop, and to his dismay, the hotel was not a hotel. It was an inn, flanked by boarded-up outhouses or stables. He parked on the broken forecourt. A damp chill welcomed him. There were 6 bedrooms facing the front. His was the only one in use. Dinner was served in what they called the snug. The menu offered tomato soup, chicken, chips, steak, ice cream, cheesecake, fruit salad, and cappuccino coffee. It read like something that could have pleased his parents in the 1950s. But when it arrived, the food was better than he expected, and the girl who served him was chatty and pleasant. Moreover, the beer, which he described as mild, was full of soft flavours and evoked pleasant memories of days long gone. Indeed, Bloomfield suspected that had he still been young enough to drink a lot of it, he would have been awash before he was merry. Did she know the church a few miles to the northwest, he asked. She didn't, but Mr. Ralph might. She'd bring him. You mean that place up Manor Farm way? Never had cause to go there myself, he said. Most of its parish up and went after the 47 floods, or so I've heard, or maybe it was 53. It's kind of on a hill, you know, but the land around is as flat as here and not well served by cuts like we are. Is the church in use? I wouldn't know, but I did read in the local paper a while back that they got a big lottery grant or something to open up the museum, that's Mere House, and refurbish a church for concerts. What's it a museum of? Sorry, I've no idea, sir. Curios of some sort, I suppose. Can I get you another pint? That night, after he had arranged to a nice symmetry the indifferent ornaments on the shelf above the blocked-up fireplace in his room, Bloomfield slept fitfully, not quite warm enough and unsettled by silence. No cars passed, no night birds sang or dogs barked, and you could hear no voices or movements once the few occupants of the public bar had gone, all men by the sound of their retreating shouts. He was thankful he had booked in for only one night at such an out-of-the-way place. After his explorations in the morning, Ely offered more familiar activity, better food, and the hotel into which he had booked was well recommended by the guides and close to a suitable church. His last coherent thought before morning was that whatever the shortcomings of his present accommodation, he had not had to suffer his favourite aversions, jazz, noodle soup, or provincial nationalism. When he woke, a thin mist hung over everything he could see from the window, and when he got down to the snug that also served as the breakfast room, none of the 4 tables were laid. Irritated, he poked into the other rooms and eventually into the kitchen behind the bar. The girl who had served him the previous evening was taking off her coat and combing hair that was already in good order. I asked for breakfast at 8 a.m. It's 8:15 now, he said primly. Oh, no, sir. It's only 7:15. You forgot to put your watch back last night. The hour came off. Why didn't... I'll be as quick as I can, she interrupted. The bar's warm enough from last night. You could wait there. Wrong-footed in a way that made him feel confused and angry, and for which he could find no one to blame but himself, he retreated to the bar. He had never made a mistake like that before. How could he have forgotten? There were patients in the Royal Infirmary with dementia who were younger than he was. He must get a check-up. No, that might jeopardize his position in his own territory. It was just a solitary aberration. He'd lost his grip on things for a moment. But it mustn't. Breakfast ready, sir. The greasy egg and thick rashers were untidily tumbled on the plate. The white toast was flabby, the rindless marmalade too sweet, and the tea over-infused. Afterwards, he was obliged to clean his teeth with more than usual vigour before packing with precise deliberation. Go down to Little Raveley and turn right at Red House Farm. Then make for Moat Farm. Manor Farm is a mile too on, but there'll not be much of a road, he was told by the landlord in answer to his inquiry. The church, St. Frida's, or some such name, is by Mere House. And is Mere House occupied? Bloomfield was conscious of a slight check in the landlord's easy discourse. No, sir, I believe it's been empty of family since long before my time. But as I said last night, it is half kept up as some sort of museum. You can ask at Manor Farm if you want to know more. You hesitated before saying it was empty. Did I, sir? I must have been thinking what I could tell you about it. And is there any more you can tell me about it? Only that someone at the bar once told me there was a keeper there. In the church or the house? I'm afraid he didn't say, or maybe I can't remember. 20 minutes later, the Mercedes would not start. The first turn of the key merely produced a click, the second and third nothing more. No warning lights were on, and all the electric functions responded correctly. He put in the gear, worked the pedals and tried again. Nothing but the click. This was past endurance. It would take ages to get road rescue services to such a place on a Sunday. He felt for his mobile in the pocket where he always kept it. No signal. He would have to go back into the pub and use their landline. At that moment, Ralph, who must have been watching, emerged from the entrance. "Having trouble?" he asked, in that tone of voice that lies between sympathy, a statement of fact, and an accusation. "My brother had to pay 3,000 quid for a new computer box when his Merc packed up. These foreign cars is no more than a bag of scrap metal when they give in. Here, try kicking it." Bloomfield winced at the idea. "I'd prefer to get help," he said. "As you wish, but let's at least try rocking. Put in the gear, it won't take any harm." Reluctantly, Bloomfield did as he was told, and was horrified at the extent of amplified wave motion Ralph induced in the big car. "Now try, sir." The engine started at the first touch. "I told you, them things is something of a bugger in the wrong hands, but a bit of rough handling never hurt them, like women. Cheers." Bloomfield thanked him and drove away, badly ruffled by the failure of what he assumed would never fail, and appalled by the attitude to women. What age did the man think he lived in? In London, legal action were taken for less. The road to Little Raveley took him back on the same unfrequented byway he had used the previous day. He had not then registered Little Raveley as a place, and was again past its farm and terrace of 5 cottages, almost without being aware of it. But the track to Red House Farm was marked with a painted sign. As he passed the buildings, he saw no one, neither stock nor dog, and beyond it, the way to Moat Farm gave up all pretence of a surface, becoming after a mile or so no more than a strip of mud broken by dark puddles, and close confined on both sides by new ploughed land. There was no room to turn, and Moat Farm, he decided, must be abandoned, for the way forward was unmarked by wheel or hoof. He would have to reverse, and then go round the long way, coming in eventually from the north as the AA book had indicated. But as soon as he commenced backing, something was wrong. The car was dragging sideways on a rear wheel. Dreading what he might find, he got out. The driver's side had a flat tire. The red house was far away in the mist, devoid of life. There was no help for it. He would have to do the job himself. The instructions were too detailed. The tools were well hidden. 3/4 of an hour later, muddy-kneed, dirty-handed and ill-tempered, he was able to back the car until he could turn in the yard of the farm. Having extricated himself from the deplorable dead end, he paused to examine the map. To reach his destination by the way shown in the AA book would mean driving back to the motorway, running parallel with it for a considerable distance, and then turning east for a more meandering miles. But the Ordnance Survey seemed to offer the last chance of an alternative. Not far ahead, a road, shown as a pale yellow line, turned right at a telephone kiosk by the main line, and after following the railway, bent sharply east to link up with the failed road from Moat Farm, shown only as a dotted line. It ended just short of Mere House, obviously within an easy walk of the church. He ought, he knew, to abandon the whole idea. But there had been a plan, and plans were made to be followed. He must try again, despite the feeling that obstructions were being put in his way by nothing, by chance. The non-answer irked him like an insult. The telephone kiosk, losing its paint and out of use, was there. So was a no-through road sign, the first he had seen on what must be a wilderness of no-through roads. Without warning, an express train tore past on the low embankment. For a moment startling, then an assurance of things ordered and normal. He turned to drive parallel with the railway. In the haze, he thought he could see the church ahead on its sloping pasture. No hill at all, really, but conspicuous in comparison with the seemingly endless fenland. The road bent away from the embankment, and after a few hundred yards came to an end at a field gate, from which he could discern what must be the Mere House ahead on the right, and more clearly the church below on the left. In order to be ready for his return, he parked facing back down the road before carefully locking the car. But against whom or what, in the deserted fields, he did not stop to consider. The air was thickly damp, and the house, when he reached it, did not invite close examination. What he could see of it showed blank windows, grass and overgrown shrubs encroaching on the drive to the front door, and dilapidated iron gates held open by brambles and nettles in winter decay. The building was symmetrical, 4 windows each side of the porch, with a mean little portico, and the whole badly proportioned. There were no lights or other signs of habitation. He turned down towards the church, a field's width away. There was no path in the grass, and no indication that one had ever existed. He directed his attention forward, but the house behind him was the sort of place that made you want to look back, not out of interest, but because it conveyed the unpleasant sensation that someone was watching from within it. Robustly hostile to superstitions and unfounded feelings in all secular things, Bloomfield resisted for a time the inclination to look back, but the inclination mastered him. At the end of the building to which the AA's track would provide access, he saw the indeterminate outline of a parked car. Someone must be in the house or at the church. The keeper? The keeper of what? He did not wish to be seen as an intruder. It was Sunday, and past 1 o'clock, past the time for a service of whatever sort might still be held there. Mentally he hesitated, but an observer would have seen no check in his steady progress down the scarcely perceptible slope. A wicket gate opened into a graveyard, where the trace of a path led to the over-large porch of the church. Undoubtedly a Victorian addition, Bloomfield decided. If it was all as poor as that, the whole trip was a waste of time, a folly of curiosity. He ought to have left St. Frida, whoever she was, probably one of those spurious survivors of Celtic Christianity, pre-Augustinian anyway, to her own devices. He turned the iron handle of the door, expecting it to be locked. It opened, scraping on the stone flags within, and letting out a smell of damp stone and mould. There were no worshippers, and no service could have been held there for many ages. The interior was dark. Not dark on purpose, like some of the Bulgarian and Greek Orthodox churches he had seen, where icons and wall paintings were made mysterious and ultimately awesome by the gloom, but dark with disuse and age, the narrow stained glass windows admitting such light as there was into middle air between the black-beamed roof and the twilight of huddled pews. He could see the east window, a confusion of suffering in heavily coloured glass, which was probably 19th century, but let into much earlier lancet windows. Below them was a stone table, all that remained of the altar. He crossed himself defensively. There were no keepers with whom to make peace, or who would importune him for subscriptions for restoration of the fabric. All decorations and movable items were gone, except for the pews and an acorn-shaped pulpit with a wooden sounding board above it, standing on the right at the entrance to the chancel. A debris of twigs and dry leaves had drifted to the side of the central aisle. Behind him, at what from the outside he knew to be the foot of the tower, with the closed west door beyond it, another Victorian intrusion, several heaps of rope lay where they had presumably fallen from the bells. Memorials to the unremembered dead cluttered as dim formal shapes on the walls of the side aisles. Near the porch was a table with what he mentally classified as stuff on it. He looked closer. A wooden collecting box, a dirty plate holding some pamphlets, a heap of twigs and birdlime that must have fallen from a nest somewhere above, and what looked like an old ashtray. The faded pamphlets were headed A Brief History of St. Friedwide's Church from its first foundation until the present day, 6d. Oh dear, not quite an outlandish saint as he had supposed. Bloomfield carefully selected the third copy down and attempted to calculate what 6 old pence would be in present-day value. But he did not know the factor required. A pound would have to do. How very irritating. As the coin clunked into the empty box, his eye caught the plate again. On the rim, but smeared over with dirt, with eccentric heavy edges to the capitals, you could make out the lettering T-H and a small O. It was interesting. Tipping the pamphlets and detritus onto the table, he carried the plate to the better light of the porch. What he saw had his heart leaping with wild excitement. Was it possible? The pattern of the rim was perfect. So was the colour and the central shield-like device with what looked like corn dollies in the corners, 2 at the top and 1 at the foot. It felt right. It looked right. But part of the rim was masked with the filth of decades, perhaps centuries, and he could not see the rest of the lettering. Trembling between anticipation and disbelief, he wet his handkerchief on the grass and wiped the rim. It was there. Thomas Toft. It was an original Staffordshire slipware dish from the 1670s. Unchipped, not sun-bleached, better than anything he'd ever seen. Better, perhaps, than anything else in existence of its sort, and one of the almost legendary treasures embellished with the arms of the worshipful company of Cordwainers. What should he do? Whom should he alert? It had obviously been there for many years, untouched and forgotten. A priceless survivor, left to rot or be broken, wasted on a non-existent purpose in a place no one visited. He walked back and replaced it reverently on the table. From somewhere high in the chancel, an abrupt and angry flapping startled him for a moment. Nothing but the birds, or one of them. A terrifyingly simple idea had formed in his mind. The same abandoned function could be served in the same way, with the same appearance, by the replica plate that Providence had put in his car. No one would notice. No one would care. No clergy, no congregation, no knowledgeable visitors, no keeper at the gate. The unexercised function would continue exactly as before, but the neglected original would be cherished and preserved for posterity as the pride of his collection. If anyone asked, he had bought it in a junk shop, as indeed he had, he told himself. He was back at the car looking in the boot for the package, almost unaware of the walk. But on the return journey he looked at the house to reassure himself again that he was not watched. There were still no lights and no signs of life. The car was there, an indistinct outline in the twilight that was early afternoon. He must hurry. The dark would come. He was halfway across the field when he remembered he had not locked the car. He must go back. No. Apart from the other car, there was no evidence of any intruding human presence, and the fog was thickening to become serious. It would be too easy to get stuck in those horrid, ghastly drains and ditches if he could not see properly. The imponderables worried him more than they usually did, but he must get on with it. It was darker in the porch than when he left, and darker still where the table stood. He hesitated, listening. and for a while that elongated into an unaccountable passage of time, he remained like a graven image. The building was full of a wordless whispering and fluttering, and then a sound like remote thunder for which there was no explanation. The longer he listened, the less he wanted to draw attention to himself by moving or making a noise. A tortoiseshell butterfly, fatally disturbed from its winter rest, fluttered down and alighted on the plate before vanishing again into the dark. The movement broke his captivity. The newspaper wrappings of the Victorian plate were difficult to see and get off. He had not noticed the sellotape. He should have unpacked it outside. The activity seemed to be making a lot of noise in the vaulted space. It must be the birds again, distracting him from what he wanted to do. He looked towards the pulpit. The outline of the column of wood that supported its sounding board gave the impression of someone in black standing above him. It was silly, but disconcerting. Gothic imaginings of haunting and possession did not captivate him. Moreover, they were excluded by his theology. Derelict buildings in bad light, infested with birds and other unwanted items, were no more than they seemed, and he had business to transact. That thou doest, do quickly. The words came unbidden into his head as if he had heard them. It was from something he ought to remember, but they were right. Without thought he crossed himself again, his sop to honesty staring up from the table, brightly smart against the mellow softness of the ancient treasure. But that swishing sound was not a bird. Something was moving in the pulpit. He froze. He was going to be caught. There was a keeper there, and he had seen what was being done. The black cloud was flowing down into the chancel, spreading out to hide the altar table, rearing up as a figure gowned with spears, wings like a quiver of arrows fanning out, grasping the light above the chancel, reaching down to take him. With a sob of terror, Bloomfield seized the plate and wrappings and fled for the door, dragging it shut behind him in a thoughtless attempt to keep that which was within confined. All he knew was that he must get away from it. But he must not drop the plate. It had to be secured in the protective newspapers and carried safely in the bag. At the gate that divided the open field from the falling multitude of stones and leaning crosses around the church, he willed himself to delay long enough to make it safe, only to become aware of a new and very real threat to add to the sudden terror he had experienced in the church. The mist and low cloud had come down so heavily that it was like the approach of night. He had delayed too long. He could see nothing of the house, only the slope to give a sense of direction. He dared not run. He would be lost in no time. He had to keep control and watch where he was going. He looked up. The twilight held him like a dark halo. He looked back. The church had disappeared in impenetrable fog, but the fog was developing a centre that was moving. He stumbled blindly on, away from it, away from whatever it was. An outline of the house formed in the gloom. He had come too far to the left, to where the other car had been parked, but it was not there now. Like some wild animal in fear of the swift and deadly attack of a foe at night, he had to escape the dreadful place. He swerved to the right, running now. The field gate was there, and the safety of his car beyond it. He could not unfasten the gate. Something had tangled the confusion of nails and hooks that secured it. Someone was following him, a figure formed in the mist. In a frenzy of apprehension, he attempted to climb the gate, and was over the top when he slipped, crashing down in what felt like slow motion onto the side of his head and shoulder. He could have saved himself, but he held the plate up as he hit the earth and rolled over, shocked and twisted by the fall, but not disabled. He could move, stand, breathe. To reach the car was salvation. The pain would come later. In an automatic action, he pressed the unlock button on the key fob. The precious package was almost tumbled onto the floor of the passenger seat beside him. His pursuer was at the gate, calling for him to stop. He wrung the starter and jerked the big car away in the wrong gear, clear of what was following him. clear of the densest fog, clear of any association with what he had left behind. The fog thinned, became a loose mist, then no more than a damp haze. The railway embankment was ahead. He turned left and brought the car to a halt, conscious of pain in his back and neck, and of a grazed soreness on the side of his face, and of the need to compose his disordered feelings. He had made a fool of himself in the church. He should have confronted the shadows. They were mere fancies, creatures of light and place, and a flock of birds. But he had been followed from the house, possibly even from the church. Someone had shouted "Stop!" as he fled for the car. Who? Why? He must get away to the warm comfort and reassurance that awaited him less than an hour's drive away. And he had that wonderful plate. The roar of a passing train abruptly woke him to present things. At the church it had sounded like distant thunder. Yes, of course, that was the explanation. He drove on, thankful for the little daylight that remained. At the T-junction with the road that went under the railway, he drew to a halt. He needed to turn right. It was when he did so that he saw the parked police car facing him with two uniformed officers in it. Both got out as he was forced to stop by the blockage. He wanted to protest his innocence, but they could not know. They just could not know. Anyway, the receipt for the plate was probably in the bag. "Sorry to delay you, sir. Have you come up from Mere House Museum?" "I think that's where I've been. I was looking at the old church. Why?" "You seem to have hurt yourself. You had a fall or something?" "Yes, I slipped climbing a gate. Why?" "Nothing to worry about, sir. You're not wearing your seat belt. May I see your driving licence?" Grammatically, it was a request. Practically, it was an order. "Yes, I always carry one. I'm sorry about the belt." "Thank you. That's in order, Mr. Bloomfield. And your address?" "Thank you. Now, may we have a look at the contents of your car, sir, just as a formality?" This was awful. It must be irrelevant, a coincidence. "Yes, if you have to," he said. "But I think I have a right to ask why." "You say you were up at the house. What were you doing there?" "I told you, looking at the church." "And did you go near the house?" "No. Yes, near enough to see that it looked as if no one was there. It's deserted, isn't it?" "And you didn't go into it?" "Of course not. Why should I?" "And you saw and heard no one?" "I saw another car at the far end of the house from where I parked. It had gone when I came back from looking at the church." "Didn't mention that when you said the house looked deserted?" "Why should I? It had nothing to do with me." "So why were you running away, and why did you fail to stop when my colleague called to you?" The cold, sick apprehension was back, crawling up his throat and into the back of his eyes. "I was in a hurry to get away from the fog. I didn't hear him." "I see. Now, will you get out of your car and let us inspect the contents, please?" The other constable was already opening the passenger door and lifting out the bag containing the plate. "Be careful," he pleaded. "It's breakable and price. The price is on a receipt in the bag. I've just bought it." "That's all right, sir. I don't expect it's what we are looking for." His companion was attempting to open the boot. "Here, let me help you," Bloomfield offered. "These cars have their idiosyncrasies. There's only my luggage in it." His hold-all and plastic bag of essential odds and ends, and his hat and coat were precisely as he left them. A small, new, black case with trundle wheels was not. He had never seen it before, although he had seen plenty like it. "That's not mine. It's nothing to do with me. I didn't put it there," he blurted out before he could be asked. The constable turned it carefully on its back without saying anything. "Will you open it, please?" "No, it's not mine. I never saw it before." "Very well. I am opening it now with Constable Ash watching." The zip slid round with ease. Inside were a number of two-handled pots, decorated with primitive patterns of flowers in old blues and greens and brownish yellow, each in its own bubble-wrap bag, each, as Bloomfield almost at once recognised, English Delftware posset pots of the late 17th century, each an item of extraordinary value. The two constables had discreetly placed themselves, one each side of him. The one who had been addressed as Ash said quietly, And you say this is not yours, and you were never in Mere House Museum? Yes, I've never seen it before. But you know what it is, and that it came from the museum? Yes, it's... He stopped. The dreadful reality of the appearance of things was making me feel sick. Yes, sir? It's Delftware, concluded meekly. I never touched it. Quite so. I observe you're wearing gloves. So how do you explain having it in your car? I can't. Someone must have put it there. I forgot to lock the car when I went down to church. I'm afraid that will not do, Mr. Bloomfield. You're forgetting too many things. My colleague at the house saw the lights blinking as you unlocked it when you were running away, but he got your registration number. I am arresting you on suspicion of burglary and for being in possession of stolen items. You do not have to say anything but... The voice droned on. Incomprehensible words recited too quickly in a monotone and ending, "Do you understand?" as handcuffs were fitted to his wrists. Yes, he mumbled, as from within a nightmare, but he did not understand. Now get in the back of the car. My colleague will sit beside you. But what about my car, my things? Your car will be locked and safe here until we can send a pickup for it. Your possessions and the stolen items will be taken with us. Get in. As he spoke, another police car came to a halt beside them. I think we've got him, Bloomfield heard. But go on up to the museum in case there's another of them coming this way. The keeper said there was some silver missing as well. It's not here. You, get in. I won't ask again. Mind that bag. Mind it. It's breakable, Bloomfield cried with rising hysteria as he was bundled into the car, where he lapsed into a despairing silence, his well-regimented world collapsing inside his head like a doomed cathedral in an earthquake. They seemed to be expected at the police station when they arrived there some time later in the dark. An elderly, alert-looking man was just taking off his coat. He sat down beside the custody sergeant, fidgeting nervously. Constable addressed him. We've recovered some of the stuff, Dr. Sorrell, he said, putting the case and Bloomfield's bag on the table. There's nothing else of interest in the car. They searched it thoroughly and reported to us while you were driving here. Could you confirm this is from the museum? Yes, that's the missing Delftware, the curator confirmed without hesitation. For heaven's sake, handle it carefully. It's absolutely irreplaceable, almost unique. I can't imagine why they wanted it. They could never have sold any of the stuff. And the item in the plastic bag? Be careful, Bloomfield howled. It's mine, it's priceless. Staffordshire slipware, rare beyond belief. Dr. Sorrell was unwrapping it carefully. This is not our stuff, he said. Just worthless Victoriana. Burslem, about 1870, I'd say. It's not! It's real! You had it in your filthy little church. You bloody fools! You're not fit to sit on a thing like that. What sort of keeper are you? You don't know what you're talking about. Give it me! He started up, as if to seize the plate from the hands of the curator. Firm hands grasped him on both sides. Put him in a cell, the sergeant ordered. We'll deal with the formalities later. Sorry, Dr. Sorrell, continued when they were alone. The constable who arrested him said he seemed harmless and even respectable, but appearances can sometimes be very deceptive. He looked a bit shocked to me. A bit knocked about as well. I know. He fell getting over a gate. He said so himself, and the constable who was trying to apprehend him saw it happen. But he got the registration number. That's why the constable, Ash, was so confident they had the right man. We ran it through the system, and everything clicked. We even know he is was a respected collector of old china. You said those pots would be unsellable. Yes, they're too well known. He would only have wanted them as or for a dishonest collector, and what you've just said... He left the sentence unfinished. Did you look at his eyes, Sergeant? He's either mentally deranged or absolutely terrified. The sergeant readjusted the way he was sitting. Yes, we'll keep an eye on him, he said. His fuss about the plate was very odd, though. Forgive me pressing the point, but are you quite certain it's nearly worthless? Without a doubt. Look for yourself. The maker's mark is on the back. But it's certainly a curious mistake for him to make, if, as you say, he's a collector. I wonder why he connected it with St. Fried's. You heard him say he'd got it there. I shall have to have a serious look at that place again before the restorations start. But right now I'm more alarmed about the missing silver. It's Carolean, you know, very sellable in the right places. The sergeant tried to look knowledgeable, but merely succeeded in looking uncomfortable. We'll have a thorough search in the morning, he said. If he's hidden it, we'll find it. If he had an accomplice who got away before we arrived, he may tell us for his own salvation. He paused. I suppose it's theoretically possible he's telling the truth, and that the stuff they couldn't sell was dumped in his car's diversion, but no. The evidence is overwhelming. No jury would credit that theory. When the curator had gone, the sergeant reflected for a minute. Ash, he said, you're on duty till midnight. Keep a close eye on Bloomfield after we've charged him. He could be the suicidal type. We don't want that sort of thing here. Later, the constable noted that the prisoner was sitting rigidly upright on his bunk, staring at the floor. Weird guy. He's arranged his jacket on the floor so it looks like a flying bird, he told his superior. Mad, he muttered to himself, sotto voce. Quite mad. I prefer a nice bit of Wedgwood myself any day.